It's Dave.
And Dan.
And welcome to another episode of Hooked on Headwaters. And today we're going to be talking about fishing line. There's a couple of different choices out there when it comes to fishing line. Captain Dan's going to help us decipher which one's best for which application. So with that said, we'll be right back. Welcome back, and as I said, Captain Dan's going to walk us through the different fishing lines. There are a couple of choices that we have, right, Dan? Mm-hmm. And Dan's going to explain the pluses and the minuses with each one.
Right. Okay, so actually we have some monofilament here.
Yep.
This happens to be 15 pound. We got some 20 pound braid, showing you the color of it. And of course we got fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon is going to be more, we're going to talk about leaders and things.
Yeah.
So right now we're just going to talk about mainline, what you're actually going to put on your spool, whether it be a spinning reel or a bait casting reel.
Right.
There's some differences between the things. So I'm going to start with let's say the mono, and we'll go from there. This is what I started fishing when I was a kid.
I think everyone started with mono.
Yeah.
It's certainly the cheapest of the three.
Right.
And you can probably pick it up at any gas station,
any box,
any department store, just about any place.
Yeah, so, unless you're really kind of an old timer where they started out many years ago with Dacron line, which is similar to braid but different, like a tiny rope.
Right.
They caught a lot of fish in those days on that stuff. Yeah. But then after that came along the development of monofilament. So this is more like it's a sort of plastic.
Yeah.
It's real clear. Let's go over some of the pros about this.
Yep. One,
it's the most affordable line you're gonna buy. So if you're on a budget and you got just a couple bucks to buy some line, go mono.
Can't go. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, there's been millions of fish caught on mono.
That's right.
Everything from brim and bluegill to blue marlin. It's been caught on monofilament over the years.
Right.
And it's not out of style. I still use it. You still use it.
Yep.
A lot of people are still using mono. Some of the pros of it: one is its cost. The cost is lower than others. Two, you got some stretch.
It's very forgiving. So if
you want some
you make a mistake, or you had the wrong rod, if you have a stiffer rod, that gives you a little more forgiveness.
Right.
Forgiveness.
I think one of the best qualities is it's clear. Where a comparable braided line, it's much more visible in the water. So when you're dealing with line shy fish, say like a yellowtail snapper or yellowfin tuna, or in bass in really clear water, sometimes you have to go to a mono instead of the braid because the fish will shy away from the braid. Some other things about it that I don't like though. So one, you put this on your reel and it's been on there for a little while, you start getting some line memory. Like this, I've got some 100-pound test here. You can see it was on a spool for quite a long time. It's not supple like this new 15 pound. Of course, it's two different things. One's bigger than the other, but when this stuff is brand new, it's a little more supple. Yeah.
And the properties tend to deteriorate, right?
They do, Dave.
After a while.
The
line,
you'll find, and we'll get into it in a few minutes, sometimes you have more longevity with braid.
Right.
Compared to mono that's fished the same amount of time. Sensitivity wise, it's not as sensitive as some other lines on the market like braid because of the stretch. Now I said that's a pro, but it's also a con too, depending on your situation. If you're fishing and making really long casts where you have to have a good solid hook set, mono may not be the best choice. But if it's all you can afford, that's the right choice.
Right.
So I like this. It tends to float most times, where other like braid and other things will sink. That can make a difference if you're live bait fishing. Sometimes you really want your bait. You don't want that bait dragging the line around through the water. And this being that it likes to float most times.
Or getting line. This is your lure. Getting a line that will sink could get caught up, fouled up in the hooks of the lure.
It's less likely to foul with like treble hook baits, especially topwaters tend to get fouled. Freshwater guys throwing prop baits like the double swores. Those tend to foul up a lot with braided lines, where not so much with the mono because it likes to lay straight. It's not quite as supple as some of the other things. So that's a lot of the stuff that I like about mono. But I grew up fishing this stuff.
Yep, so did I.
There's another thing that can be good on your heavier stuff. It's great for leader material. But this can be sometimes can be a little unforgiving on really sharp stuff, which you typically don't find a lot of sharp stuff in freshwater. I'm talking more saltwater, oyster beds,
oysters,
and barnacles. You got to be careful with any line you fish. But you start getting nicks in this stuff, and it can break easy. Another thing too, as you use the line and you've had it on there for several weeks and you're doing a lot of fishing, cutting off and retying. And we've talked about this previously. As you use the line, the amount of line on your spool deteriorates. The size around the spool gets smaller. And as you were saying the other day, your distance starts to shrink.
Yeah, it does.
To where if you use, this is 15-pound diameter monofilament line. This is 20-pound. It's 6-pound test diameter. So you cut 50 feet of this off compared to 50 feet of this. The diameter on your spool gets smaller, the amount of line. And what happens, the drag when the line is coming off this, especially a spinning reel, and the drag that's created
around
on the spool. It shorts your cast. And same thing with bait caster. When the amount of line on your spool starts to shrink, your cast, it has to really come off that spool. That spool's got to turn really quickly. Also with that, in twofold, is your retrieval rate as you reel, as it picks up line. Baitcaster and spinning reel. It changes quite a bit. It's kind of like a bicycle where you got a pedal, you got your big sprocket on the front and your little one in the back. To move the same amount of distance, that little sprocket's got to turn
more frequently.
So that's some pros and cons of it. I still use it. I bought this for when I was going down to the Keys to fish for yellowtail snapper. As I said, it's clear. Obviously, it's clear compared to other stuff. Really line-shy fish, they don't like that braid. So, sometimes you have to go to mono to be more successful. One thing I do like about it is it's quiet when you cast it compared to braid. You don't have that sawing sound going through your guides, and I really enjoy it for those different things. So moving on from that, we talked about the braid now, so it's got pros and cons just like everything else. It's going to cost you more money than the mono.
Yes, it is.
And sometimes quite a bit more depending on the brand you go with. Some of the things you'll find as we're talking about purchasing and comparisons is you can buy a spool of mono on a spool kind of like this one. You can buy a braid on it too, but you're buying 150 yards worth of line. You end up having some line left over usually because it's hard to determine exactly how much it's going to hold. So, when I buy the big 1,500 yard spool. You can get up to 3,000 yards. And just like mono, you can get it from 2 pound to 400, I think. This same deal, you can get it down to really fine stuff. I think 4 or 6 is about the smallest I can get, I think.
I think I've seen 4. Which
it's like the strength of a hair, almost. It can start to get hard to tie when it's that small. Some of the pros, another one of the pros about it is there's no stretch. And when you're making those long casts and you need a hook set, the lack of stretch helps in your hook setting ability. Also, sensitivity, feeling, this is the 15-pound test here of mono. You can see there's some stretch there. You're not going to get stretch with this the braided line. A long cast, you might get a small amount of stretch, but there's virtually no stretch there. So in turn, what that does, it gives us a greater sensitivity in feeling bites. But the problem with the lack of stretch is sometimes you need stretch. Especially if we're talking budget and you can afford to get the braid, you go but you don't have the money to get a different rod, and you got a really stout rod. The braid may not work out well if you're throwing topwaters on that early stout rod, where it worked fine with the mono.
Right.
Because of the stretch. It may not work as well. I'm not saying it won't work, but it may not work as well on, say, your treble hook baits, because the fish thrashing around, it tends to rip the hooks out of the fish's mouth.
Right.
Because you don't have any shock absorber there.
Yeah, and again, that shock absorber is forgiving in this case. And sometimes even forgiving if you're bottom fishing.
Right.
You may just feel that first bite, especially some snapper, first bite. Yep. And they're gone because you yanked it a little too fast, and the mono may be, in certain circumstances, be a little more forgiving. So when you do pull up, a little stretch, and the hook's out.
Yeah. And now
that little delay. I know it's microseconds, but it makes a difference.
Yeah. Now he's talking about not really deep water fishing.
Right.
You're talking like fishing in the intercoastal waterway.
Right out front. Well, I say out front, within 5 miles.
20, with 25
within
feet
20
of water.
miles. Yeah.
So now down deep when you're bottom fishing, the braid is really, in my opinion, the way to go.
Yeah.
You can feel everything. You can feel your baits much better than you can on a mono.
Yep.
The current has less effect on it. Like we're talking, you're anchored up.
Yep.
Or got your spot lock on your trolling motor in a high current situation. Due to the diameter.
Yeah, it's just a low profile, so obviously the water is going to cut through it.
There's less drag on that.
Yep.
For us bass fishermen, hooking fish in thick vegetation, this will actually cut through vegetation much better, like say hydrilla. Cut through hydrilla much better than a monofilament.
Right.
Monofilament tends to hang up. And then also, say wind knots.
Yeah.
On your spinning reels or backlashes.
Oh yeah.
Bird nest in a bait caster. To me, it's going to still get a knot and things. But this is more forgiving when you get to the point where, like, say a wind knot. You know how you get down and you got it all untangled, but there's that last one little loop.
Yeah.
One little loop, and it's like, I can't get it out. You can't pick it out. And if you pull on mono, it typically will break about every time.
Right.
Where a lot of times the braid, you can pull it and the knot slips and it actually unties that one little loop and it'll pop and it'll come back. And this is no worse for wear.
Right.
Where, or like a big nasty bird nest, like I've had a lot of times. Mono, you're pulling, and it can kind of kink the line, and that weakens the monofilament.
Yep.
Whereas those kinks will not necessarily weaken the braided line. So those are kind of to me the main two differences. And of course, this is an opaque line. Both monofilament and braid you can get in a plethora of colors. Everything high vis, camo green, black.
Even now I've seen where these are being colored measurements, so you can get 20 yards, every 25 yards it changes color, so if you keep track of it, you know more or less how much line you've got out.
Cool. They make it in camo, where I have some that's 3 different colors. I think some of it can be gimmicky.
Yeah, I think so.
But you know, knots you use basically all the same, most of the same knots. So just for example, a uni knot in monofilament, I'll go through 5 wraps, whereas on braid I'll do 7, maybe 8.
Right. But but there are knots that you work on here with mono won't work with.
Right,
like an improved a clinch knot.
A clinch knot, the fisherman's knot.
Right, fisherman's knot.
Yeah, the braid will not accept that.
Right.
It'll pull right out. Where mono, it kind of tends to help bind on itself. The knots I've found that I can use just about any knot with braid. Or excuse me, with mono, the uni knot, Palomar knot. The old fisherman's knot. There's a bunch of blood knot. Those kinds of things. Mono's pretty acceptable to those things, but then braid is can be a little more difficult to tie.
Yeah.
It only accepts certain knots well. You got your double uni knot, Palomar knot, that all works real great. Then they have the FG knot for tying mono or leader rather to braid. That's really great. There's certain ways you got to tie it, and there's a lot of videos, and we can maybe do a video at some point of actual knot tying. So those are kind of the overall. So a lot more sensitivity than this, a lot more affordability than this. I'm not saying that this is out of the price range, but it is more expensive. I suggest if you're doing a lot of fishing, buy it in the bulk spool. That way you don't have as much waste. That's why I bought this. I only had like 5, 6 reels that needed to spool up. But what it cost me here, I wasn't piecemealing it together with short little pieces of line. I definitely prefer to get 1,000, 1,500 yards of line. And you pay for it up front. One thing, pro and con. Pro on this, con on this. Braid will last a lot longer. If you take care of it, you know, you're not throwing it up in a lot of oyster beds. No matter what you're fishing, you're gonna have to change.
Yep.
But this will last. I've got a reel that I've had the same braided line on for quite a long time. I don't fish that rod every day, but I've had it on there like three years or more. And I was in the Keys a month ago, and my kids they caught like 40-pound tarpon on this braid. Now you inspect it just like you would inspect mono for any nicks. Cut those nicks out. This kind of tends to fray.
It does.
But you know, it's one thing about this too is that you cannot do with this. You know, this has, as I said, has line memory. This has no memory. So what I've done is when, you know, sometimes the color wears out of this stuff, what I'll do is I'll just switch it. I'll peel the line off one reel, and I'll just tie right from my rod tip to the other reel, and I'll reel it off the other reel onto the next reel.
So now the end of the old spool will be new on the new spool.
And you got basically brand new end of line there where you haven't cast it.
And what I do is I'll use mono as a base. On the spool. So say I'm putting on new line on the spool. I'll put mono, maybe even halfway, maybe, and then I'll tie the braid on. So now the braid has something to grip, hold on to. And number two, and really the reason I use it is to save money.
Yeah.
Now I don't have to. I'm not putting on. I don't know,
400
yards of just base, which I'm never going to use because I won't be able to cast or be usable. So I'll use mono as filler, if you will.
Now, you know, like let's say if you're offshore fishing, you're, I don't know, throwing plugs on a spinning rod for yellowfin tuna. You're going to want to fill that thing most of the way up. Hard charging fish, they're pulling a lot of line, stripping a lot of drag. We're talking mostly bass fishing, intercoastal.
And inshore fishing.
Inshore stuff where you're not. So, you know, that's a little caveat to that.
So the third line is that folks use is the fluoro line. Fluorocarbon line. So what are the pluses and minuses to that?
Well, it depends on what you're talking about. What we have on the table here
is just the leader.
This is a fluorocarbon leader, which is different than some of the other stuff we've talked about previously. So this is what I use for tying any kind of line-to-line leader. Like I use a lot of braid on my boat, and I'll tie a piece. This happens to be 25 for my bass fish. So I use anywhere between 12 and 25-pound fluorocarbon, depending on my application. That I'll tie directly with a line-to-line knot. Directly to my braid, and you can either use a uni knot or an FG knot. They both work really well. What I like about the fluorocarbon, Dave, is that it's very abrasion resistant. So you know, if you're fishing and say a worm, for instance, or bass fishing with a plastic worm, you know, they suck the whole thing in, you set the hook, and the line hits the inside of their mouth, and they don't really have teeth per se, but it's kind of like sandpaper, so it starts to wear the line. So, and then you can use the mono the same you can fluorocarbon, but this has more abrasion resistance.
And it is clearer.
It's clearer.
So it's more translucent than even the best mono. And
there's lower amount of stretch as well. So what I'll do is I'll spool up a rod, or say if I'm putting a new piece of leader on, I usually go about an arm's length. That's about 5 feet. I'll put 5, maybe 6 feet of line. And as long as the line-to-line knot doesn't come all the way onto my reel, then I'll tie my line to line. That's how much leader I'll put on. And then as it gets down to about 24 inches, after about, you know, 3 feet, I'm like, man, that's getting short. Then when it's 24 inches, I cut it off and get a new piece. I do that for a couple reasons. One, it gets me a little bit of stretch, a little forgiveness. Two, definitely the two main things is abrasion resistance, And then if I got some fish that are kind of line shy, instead of running straight braid, I'll if it's opaque, I definitely want something that gives me a little advantage, what I feel is advantage. Some people don't think it makes any difference at all. They tie directly to their lure with braid.
Yep.
Now, when I was in the Keys, I was fishing for yellowtail. 15-pound mono, I was running 12 and 15-pound fluorocarbon tied directly to the mono because yellowtail in the Keys in certain areas are very, very finicky and very line shy.
Yep.
So, other things, like we were talking about the trout you caught on your trip the other day, your leaders, like this 50, if you say you're fishing snook, you're going to want probably 30 to 40 pound. Lightest I go, if I'm specifically targeting snook, it's probably 25.
Yep.
It's real stiff, and it works great for your leaders in that situation. Really abrasion resistant, especially for those snook. And it takes a loop knot really well for your walking top
so
water.
So it gives you more action on that.
So that's what, some of the benefits of that. I really like it. Now this stuff is pricey, depending on which brand you get. This happens to be, I think it was a 100-yard spool. I've got one here, a 50-pound, a 25-yard spool. So it's pretty pricey. I don't remember what that costs. This is 12 pounds. I think I paid
tends to be in
$14.
Yeah.
I think I paid 14
good
bucks
product.
for that.
Good product.
Very good product. But it's going to be much more pricey. It's not, the leader material is not what you're going to put on your spool. There's a difference.
Right, there's fluorocarbon line. Yeah,
main line.
Straight up line, main line, which it's higher density, so it just sinks quicker. So it depends again on your application. I think most guys, I don't use it that often. I think most guys for worm fishing is very applicable because it kind of gets down quick. So any type of lure that you need to really get down in the water column quickly, guys use a fluorocarbon line for.
Yeah, main line, and it's much more supple than this leader material. As you can see here, this is pretty stout stuff. It's not supple at all, and it's not designed to be supple. Especially like, say for instance, fly fishing for tarpon. You don't want. You don't want your what they would call a bite tippet, or even a leader that goes between your fly line and your bite tippet. You don't want it curly Q because that will affect your fly without a doubt. This stuff, I mean, this is 100-pound test mono. This would affect a plug, because it's going to try to get back to where it was. So that's one reason they want it straight, like for sure. If I'm fly fishing, say for big tarpon and bass, anything where I need a little bite tippet, I'm going to put fluorocarbon on because it stays nice and straight. It doesn't get this curly Q pigtail stuff. You don't want that. So it's designed for that. It's designed to be really clear, really abrasion resistant, and lay straight in the water.
Now, sometimes on a top water lure, if you use a braided line, many of you know, that line, if you tie it directly onto a top water lure with treble hooks, man, that braid line is eventually going to foul around those treble hooks like a magnet.
I guess the worst are a prop bait.
Or a prop bait.
Like a double source.
Because it sinks. It kind of sinks. It's good, so it's going to get might get pulled in behind the lure, and boom, you're into.
Right.
So sometimes not all the times, I will put a mono leader on it just because mono floats. So the mono leader will stay on top of the water, and your lure and the line will be on top of the water, or near the top.
The reason I think you get tangled so much, see how supple this stuff is.
It just.
I mean, whereas a monofilament is not near as supple. So you can see it doesn't. I don't know if you guys can see that, but anyway, I think what happens when you work in a topwater plug with that, you jerk the bait. That doesn't mean it just stops when you stop pulling. It goes forward and it overruns the line.
Exactly.
So then this line, as it moves forward, it gets all tangled up. I've heard some guys a little trick to alleviate some of that on a topwater plug. Bobber stoppers. Put 2 or 3 bobber stoppers up the line, and that should help alleviate some of that. I have not tried that because I fish the leader a lot. I like that.
Okay.
So let's come a little gist on those things. That's what how I do things. There's a tremendous amount of things, different products out there. There's tons of manufacturers, a lot of really good stuff out there, you know.
So, but as we said, if you're starting out, nothing wrong with mono. Go with mono fish. Get yourself experience with that, and maybe you move up to a braided line. And
I wouldn't let line choice stop me from going fishing.
Absolutely not. So make sure you get out there and fish.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, there you have it. Hope that helps you. Please comment below. Let us know your feelings on, or what your experiences are with the 3 different lines, and help our viewers or other viewers also educate them with. Hopefully with your comments, and so all of us can become better fishermen.
Yeah. I mean, we're always learning things.
Absolutely.
All the time.
Absolutely.
I mean, I've been fishing for a lot of years, but I learn stuff all the time.
Yeah. So please comment and let us know what your feeling are on these 3 lines of business. What three lines of 3 types of line, and your experiences with them, and we will welcome that. Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Appreciate it. All righty. Well, that's it. There you have it, Captain Dan. Thank you once again. Valuable information. We will catch you on the next video. Thank you for watching, and don't forget again, subscribe and comment below. Bye.
Thanks, guys.